My name is Michelle Jordan, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Evanston. Welcome to the forum for candidates running in the upcoming election for City Council for the 6th and 7th Ward. It's been a very long day. The city councilors serve a 4-year term. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization dedicated to promoting the active and informed participation of citizens in their government. We sponsor these events as a service to the community. The League of Women Voters neither endorses nor opposes candidates for public office. We thank the city for providing the space and the services for today's forum. Our moderator for the very last forum is Judy Hoffman. She lives and votes in Skokie. Judy has been a member of the League of Women Voters of Evanston since 2004 and has been an active as a candidate forum coordinator and moderator for most of those years, including her Skokie forums she just wrapped up last week. Judy has spent the majority of her professional career in marketing and communications and is recently retired from the Deerfield Public Library, where she served as outreach coordinator. Judy will review the forum rules, introduce the candidates, and begin the questions. Take it away, Judy.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for being here. Before we get started, the obligatory everybody silence your cell phones and other electronic devices. Thank you. This forum is scheduled to run for 45 minutes. Questions for this forum are a compilation of submissions submitted online by Evanston voters and questions developed by League members. The candidates have reviewed and agreed to the ground rules. The order in which the candidates will be responding to the questions will be in alphabetical order by last name as they're seated up there, and we'll rotate the order throughout. Everyone will answer the same question, but we'll start with a different person each time. This will be the case also for we'll just keep rotating through for the closing statements. Candidates will have a minute and a half, also known as 90 seconds, to answer both the questions and do their closing statement. Up here we have our timekeepers, and they will give candidates notice of the remaining time. They'll notify them when they have 30 seconds left, 15 seconds left, and of course stop. And when the stop goes up, the candidates, if they're still speaking, get a few more words, but then we'll go on to the next speaker. I'll be happy to repeat the questions again for any candidates. And the candidates have been instructed that once we move on to a new question, we're done, and then we start on with a new topic. We ask you, audience, I think you all seem very well behaved, but to not have any loud comments or applause during the forum. You'll be able to acknowledge the candidates at the end of the forum. Today we have all the candidates here who are on the ballot for Ward 6 and Ward 7. And I'll introduce in alphabetical order. From Ward 6, we have Candace Chow. From Ward 7, Pariel Davis. From Ward 7, Carrie Mundy. And from Ward 6, Tom Suffredin. We'll now begin the questions. And we'll begin with candidate Chow. You'll have 90 seconds. I'm going to get the questions. Question 1. What do you believe is the top challenge facing the city today and why?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being
Oh,
here.
your mic's not on. Press the button.
Push. Sorry. I think the biggest challenge facing Evanston right now is really how to build trust with residents and how to figure out in a city where we have lots of opinions, how do we engage productively? How do we collaborate towards kind of a common vision? And how do we disagree with purpose, but not personal attacks? And I think that's played itself out in several issues that have come before the council and are coming before the city. Obviously, this is an issue that's more broadly nationally a problem. And I think, in Evanston, we can hold ourselves to a higher standard. And so that's the work that I would want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Davis.
I would say something similar, but I would characterize it as responsiveness. So responsiveness to data and the residents, and just incorporating the information that we get from our community when we get community input in a meaningful manner, while at the same time using the data that we have available to make informed decisions that will have good long-term effects for our community.
Thank you. Candidate Mundy.
So I think in the macro scale, one of the most important issues facing Evanston today is sort of reconciling our intention to be a great, welcoming, open community with the realities of budget financing and limited resources. I think that we are a very open community. We're facing affordable housing challenges. We have budgeting challenges, but reconciling our intention with the reality is sometimes difficult. And I think we do have to be really meaningful about how we go about solving those problems so that we are true to ourselves, but in a very realistic way. So the answer to the question is I think we have to insert a good deal of realism in some of our expectations, but still remain the loving, wonderful Evanston that we always want to be.
Thank you. Candidate Suffredin.
Thank you. So I haven't even seen where the timekeeper is because everyone's being real quick on this. I'll be quick as well. I think that it's a hybrid of the three responses. There's a problem with trust, there's a problem with priorities, and there's a problem with finances. And they all coalesce in a lot of ways. And one of the ways that they're coalescing right now is the question about, are our priorities as a council matching up with residents' priorities? What I hear a lot is that the council spends time on matters that are not of importance in the way that they're being emphasized by the council to the residents. The consumables of civic municipal government are not being funded or prioritized appropriately relative to other things. The Envision 2045 concerns that have been expressed, and I presume there'll be more discussion of Envision 2045, are exacerbated by people saying, you know what, I appreciate you're looking at 2045, but could you give a lot less attention to that and a lot more to what's happening in 2025 on my block? And some of those things are very simple. Something that came up this week is in Hillside, which is a part of the 6th Ward that does not have sidewalks or alleys, so trash collection is on the street. The street sweeping day is on the same day as trash collection day, which leads to incompletely clean streets. There's little things, core municipal things that we're missing out on because we're too busy focused on larger things. And in terms of trust and prioritization, we need to focus on the things that are 100% within our control.
Thank you. We're on to question 2. We'll start with Candidate Davis. The city has not raised property taxes for several years. What additional sources of revenue would you support? What cuts to current programs would you support to help balance the budget?
So I think that one of the things that we have to do better at a city is focusing on our long-term planning. What that means is that we need long-term budgeting. And I think that if we made more of an emphasis on our long-term budgeting, we'd be able to more easily determine where we need to make cuts and also how we can do things more efficiently. What I'll also say is that I know for a fact after speaking to city staff that we are not efficient in our hiring of consultants and contractors. The entire situation where, the city staff came out and said that the consultants for Envision Evanston 2045 were not performing well is an example of just the difficulties we've had in the past. And I think that if we were more efficient in our spending, more efficient in making sure that our contractors did what they were supposed to, our consultants what they were supposed to, we would have, it would save us money, but also we'd see much more progress in the initiatives that we're trying to do. Additionally, I will say that I've seen suggestions that we kind of have a little bit of the bloat that we sometimes see, we've been seeing in D65, where we're not allocating the staff that we currently have efficiently. And so if we were to perhaps reconsider our structure and the ways that we are addressing how we staff ourselves as a city, we might find that we don't need to increase costs in the ways that we have in the past.
Thank you. Candidate Mundy.
So in terms of raising taxes, I do not favor raising property taxes unless it's absolutely necessary for the critical movement of the city. I think as residents, as parents, as property owners, we have a great burden. The inflationary pressures happening in our market are very real, and adding to that problem is not something that I would be hopeful of doing. I think there are times where it's a necessity to do so, and we'll get there after we get into the numbers, and if there's a way around it, then I will go in every direction to try and work around it, but if necessary, we'll do that. I think bonding is a tool, a mechanism that has been used for raising for capital projects for a very long time, and that's something that we can leverage for our capital challenges. The general fund, my understanding, is currently operates at about a $5 million a year deficit. I'd like to acknowledge that the city manager, we in Evanston, take very great notice of things that don't go right, but I think the city manager has done a good job of putting the house back together when he walked in on something where staff was leaving, and where staff was leaving, and he's wrapped his arms around that and put it back together, and I think that's worthy of noting. We have reserves for the next couple of years. I think we need to incorporate the money that's coming in from Northwestern from building permitting fees in order to the programmatic budget with long-term forecasting in order to answer the questions of budgeting shortfalls. I am not in favor of cutting programs.
Thank you. Candidate Suffredin.
Well, I think the correct answer, from my perspective, is everything and everything. And that question, I'm sure, was asked in every forum, and that everyone had different answers. But the reality is, when the new council is seated, it's going to take everybody laying what their priorities are out on the table in the open immediately, working with staff to decide what can be funded, what will require further revenue, and I'm looking at you like you said, don't do it. I apologize. You asked the question, but I should be looking at everybody else. What we're going to fund, how we're going to fund it, and then figure out what the tax increase to cover that is going to be. The reality is there's going to need to be a property tax increase at some point in the next 4 years. The other reality is that the city does not raise most of its revenue from property taxes. The property tax bill is largely comprised of the two school districts. So we need to be cognizant that anything we can do to help the school districts, particularly District 65, is something that will have a positive effect on the total tax bill of all the constituents that we serve. I think when you talk about revenue and expenses, one of the things that we rely on is parking revenue. On Monday, there's going to be a discussion about a pilot program on allowing free parking in business districts one night a month. That's a good opportunity for us to see what we give up in revenue and try and make sure that we match that up with what we gain in sales tax revenue. If we can figure out if we can trade one for the other. The reality is that this government does not take in enough to pay for everything it does. So what we're going to need to do is do less.
Thank you. Candidate Chow.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. The city has not raised property taxes for several years. What additional sources of revenue would you support? What cuts to current programs would you support to help balance the budget?
So I want to start by saying, the city has been geez Louise, sorry. At home, my mic is always on. The city is operating in an operating deficit, and it's been happening for several years. I know only Tom is on the current city council, but there have been ample opportunities to do what needs to be done, which is a full analysis of every program we do. The city manager has been holding increases, as you said, to 1%. There's no more skimming off the top. We really need to look at the effectiveness of each program that we have and assess whether, how we would prioritize that. So that's number one. In terms of revenue increases, I think those are longer term plays in my mind. The revenue increases that we've been using, permit fees and other fees, is very easy to do for the next year, and that's all that we've been planning for. The revenue and income increases we need to be looking at are long-term economic development benefits that come back to the city through sales tax, liquor tax, beverage tax. And we also need to look at at our assets and how we can potentially generate additional income for our assets. I've mentioned this before. The city of Evanston sells our water to other municipalities. We are spending at least $26 million in upgrading those water intake systems in the next several years, and yet we aren't talking about adding capacity at that time so that we might be able to sell additional water over the coming years and generate more revenue. So I think we need
Thank you,
to
Steph.
look forward. Bye.
It's always awkward. All right, the next question will go first to candidate Mundy. Many city properties, including fire stations, the police station, and the Civic Center, are in need of immense renovations or new buildings. What do you see as the best way to address these critical needs and avoid similar situations in the future?
Well, I'll speak to the future first, and I think we have to take a good hard look at our facilities management capability and understand that much of the challenge that we face now has to do with deferred maintenance to properties that if we'd taken care of it along the way, we wouldn't be here. I think in terms of answering the questions on the Civic Center, the fire station, or the fire headquarters, or the police headquarters, the Civic Center in particular, I took the moment yesterday, I was chairing a public safety civil service meeting to look at the building itself, and I think it's actually an amazing place. And it brought to mind something, having gone to Loyola. There was a Mallinckrodt campus, and I'll speak quickly. Mallinckrodt was an auxiliary campus for Loyola that was sold to the city of Wilmette. It is a building built in 1918, 5 stories, 180,000 square feet, similar to the Civic Center. What I can see for the Civic Center is perhaps a proposal that makes use of tax-free debt and a capital stack that is not incorporating federal funds that can be done in order to make this a mixed-use building that perhaps on the first floor has spacing for things like the park districts. You have maybe day camps or art classes. So the answer to the question is I think there are bonding issues which would have to happen in order to raise capital for the infrastructure projects such as the headquarters. There's lots of challenges, and I don't think I can answer them in 90 seconds, but to sum up, the reality is that we'll have to take some really innovative looks at each of these projects individually to figure out where to go with it.
Thank you. Candidate Selfridin.
Sure. So we have like a very significant series of decisions to make. And one of the first parts of that is, do we want to have a municipal campus? Is it important to have our police, fire, city hall, potentially library all in the same place or co-located closely? I think as you look at how you would sequence that, police fire headquarters is the most critical because that's a specialized building. We should not, and it is not the most efficient thing to do to repurpose another building. It's a very specialized building, and that's going to be a very expensive building. We can get by with office space as a temporary bridge to a permanent city hall, but we cannot have a temporary police and fire headquarters. One of the things that's especially critical about the police and fire headquarters, in addition to all of the technical capabilities that a building like that requires and all of the vehicle and equipment storage needs and the evidence storage needs, is that, and I don't know if there'll be a question, but I'm guessing there will be, our police headquarters is a statement of our constitutional commitment to the value of the innocence of people who have not been convicted of a crime. And that is a critical part of that. In the discussion about police and fire headquarters that the council had several months ago, one of my colleagues talked about we shouldn't spend money for criminals. The reality is that people who are there enjoy the presumption of innocence. And if we want to take that very seriously, we can demonstrate that in our commitment to building a police and fire headquarters that shows our commitment to that constitutional principle.
Thank you. Candidate Chow.
Yes, I think first and foremost, we need to look at
Your mic.
Gosh, okay. Never going to do that again, promise. First and foremost, we do need to look at every asset that we have in the city. I think that it's really kind of beyond the pale that we invested in a new facility a few months ago that was nowhere on any long-term priority map. I'm sure it will do great things on the south side of Evanston, but it's, a stone's throw away from the Crown Center. And I think that just needs to stop, number one. There's no way we can maintain deferred maintenance on buildings while we're spending time buying other buildings. It just doesn't work that way. Secondly, I do think, the idea of co-location and how can we have multiple purpose, with the exception potentially of, police and fire could co-locate, is really critical. Again, I would use the example of Robert Crown. There's a lot going on in that center. We don't need the footprint that we have currently for the Civic Center, and I think we should think creatively about how we can generate more vitality in downtown by using these properties and bringing their uses together in less physical footprint. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Davis.
Yeah, so what I'm hoping for and looking for is just general fiscal responsibility and, again, long-term planning. So when we talk about buildings, it's one of the few things where we should be planning for a 30-year horizon, and we should make our plans accordingly. What I'll say is that, when we talk about the Civic Center, I've looked at the estimates, and it seems as if we've made a lot of decisions based on what makes sense for the next year. In particular, I mean renting the downtown unit. I understand that it was a bridge that we perhaps have to do in the short term because of our deferred maintenance, which is also a result of us not making plans for what we should do in the long term. But when we talk about moving forward, we have to, look at the money, look at the estimates for how much things will cost, and then spread it out over the horizon instead of looking at it as a big sticker shock for just the initial situation. Going forward, I expect that when we run into these situations, it should result in a reaction where we want to make sure we don't do the same thing again. So if we run into a situation where we are aware of deferred maintenance for one building coming up on a $60 million potential cost because of negligence of our assets, then we should be doing analysis of all the other buildings and making similar plans for everything else. I'll also say that generally speaking, I am always reticent whenever the topic of selling property comes up because it is our most expensive asset as a city and it is our most valuable asset. And I do not think that any financial or commercial real estate person would tell us that it makes sense to give up those assets and sell them as opposed to leasing them or finding alternative uses.
Very good. Thank you. The next question will go first to candidate Suffredin. What is your understanding of the level of housing cost burden in your ward versus that in the city as a whole? What do you think the city should do to increase the supply of affordable housing, and how do you feel that sites for such housing should be selected?
Sure. So one thing that I hear a lot is that the overall cost of living in the home that people live in, and in a lot of instances it's the home that they've lived in for a long time, is rising to the point where it's not sustainable. When I first ran 8 years ago, I would talk to people and they were vaguely aware of when their last child would be graduating from Evanston schools. Now they are abundantly aware of it. You hear a lot of once Scooter is done at ETHS, I'm out of here. And sometimes that doesn't come true, but my experience is that people are not joking about that. It's too expensive to stay here. So when you talk about affordability on the stay-in, we have some serious problems. If you're talking about affordability on the get-in, we have opportunities through Envision. If we elongate it appropriately and get the right amount of buy-in from the community to create new ways for people to get in, that also will increase the ability of people to stay in. And when it's downsizing time, when it's moving around from a larger rental to a smaller rental, we have the opportunity to create spaces for them to go. In terms of where things should go, obviously transit-oriented development is something that the city has emphasized, and I think it makes the most sense, but it limits the amount of the size of the units that you can get. We need to look at how we make it easier for people to get in and stay in.
Thank you. Thank you. Candidate Chow.
I didn't. So I think I'm up to maybe 1,200 doors currently of walking house to house or property to property in the 6th Ward and asking folks just those issues of what are your concerns, what keeps you up at night. What I'm hearing time and again is that folks are staying in their homes much longer. They're doing that because they have equity in their homes, and they are, we're all in better shape than we used to be. We can move around much longer. And yet, if their kids or grandkids wanted to move into this community, they're unable to, or they're almost unable to. And I do think that that's a challenge that we need to address. You can potentially move into some smaller units apartments, but moving up and trading up in Evanston is not possible for a lot of folks. I would say that I really do believe that the best thing we can do to improve overall affordability is to do some development where it's necessary, but also to increase our economic development and reduce the burden on taxes, which is a major part of affordability and also pushes rates up for our housing stock.
Very good, thank you. Candidate Davis.
So when we talk about affordability, particularly for 7th Ward residents, I would agree with other sentiments that it is hard to get in, and also the property taxes increasing have been a huge burden for a lot of residents who currently live here. What I'll also say is that when we talk about increasing affordable housing, we have to look at the many different levers that we can pull on. I've heard residents who are long-term residents who want to stay in the area, but they find a lack of affordable or even purchasable condos, because a lot of people would like to stay and they'd like to downsize and maybe leave those homes for younger families, but they still want to stay in the city, and there are no options for staying in the city if you want to own or if you want to find a property that is smaller but what you're looking for. I'll also say that in comparison to other portions of the city, when we talk about affordable housing, a lot of residents in our area, even if they themselves are not having difficulty affording their homes, still care very much so about the broader city. And they've expressed to me a particular concern of displacement. And when we talk about displacement and gentrification or long-term residents being pushed out, what they would like the most is for us to look for solutions to keep those people in, which does not always mean increasing housing stock, but instead increasing affordability, which again goes back to making sure that people who moved here 30 years ago and their properties taxes have increased by 500% have some type of reprieve or some type of option, whether that's property tax reductions or mortgage assistance. And so what I think we need to do is take a comprehensive approach.
Thank you. And Candidate Mundy.
Thanks. So my kids say I'm a nerd. I do things like read quantum physics for fun. And in science, one of the ways you get to good research is by starting with a well-posed problem. And I would argue that the notion of affordable housing, the word affordable, is not a well-posed problem. I think the reality is that Evanston is a great place to live, and our smallest problem is a lot better than what other communities have to deal with. And folks, it makes us desirable, and that desire is what drives price. Supply has some impact, but largely it's the desire and demand that drives price, which we cannot affect through simply changing the supply level. I think in terms of the 7th Ward and the consistency, the makeup, obviously we're primarily single family homes. I think to our mind, many 7th Ward residents want to keep that. I think that we have to understand, as Tom mentioned, the reality is that the municipal piece of property taxes is relatively small. So again, that's not a lever that I think is going to change many people's lives. I think if I'm looking towards answering this question in a well-posed way, it would be by focusing on rentals, which is a place for folks to start, be it young professionals or young families, 2 to 3 bedrooms. For existing buildings, I would favor a rent stabilization program where we can come up with a max market rent helped set with developers and landlords that we can then use to really drive down affordability or keep it under control. I would also favor banning the use of leasing decision algorithms and artificial intelligence.
Thank you. The next question will start with Candidate Chow. What issues specific or unique to your ward need to be addressed by council?
So the issues that I've seen that have been unique to my ward, the 6th Ward, have by and large been issues related to why I'm running for city council. And that is that folks in the ward don't feel like they are appropriately engaged. They don't get regular information. They don't have frequent meetings. When I was looking at the Envision Evanston process, and I actually saw some video this morning of the session last year, laying out the process and the ways that individuals could engage. There was hosting a session, there was meeting in a box. I don't know if any of those things happened in the 6th Ward. I know there was a joint meeting with the 7th Ward. That's the concern. I think folks feel like they aren't part of the process. And part of that is just the lack of communication and engagement.
Thank you. Candidate Davis.
I think for the 7th Ward, coming out of everything with the Ryan Field Stadium, there's been a lot of disjointment in the 7th Ward community. A lot of people have told me that they felt the situation resulted in them having acrimonious relationships with their neighbors. Or in other words, people have said it was nasty, the whole process. And I lay that squarely on City Council not being as engaged or transparent or straightforward and allowing those town-gown relationships to worsen as a result of, the town and the gown having to interact with each other directly instead of having City Council mediating and representing. And I think moving forward, in order to rebuild that trust, because a lot of trust has definitely been lost in our community, in particular with City Council, we need to be even more so transparent and communicative and responsive, and doing more to prove that, the city is actually here for the residents and no other person. And just making that clear, again, through our communications and how we conduct ourselves in the future.
Thank you. Candidate Mundy.
So I think a large part of the issue is obviously not necessarily responsiveness. I believe that we have in the 7th Ward a good model and representative who is responsible to needs and listens as much as possible. I think what needs to be focused on is mending the gap between the necessities of residents and the realities of what can be done by the council right away. I think that we certainly have to work together and make sure that we are working in a collaborative manner. The divisiveness that has happened in the past can't happen in the future. It won't serve us any good. I think that we in the 7th Ward have a decorous way of doing things that needs to be maintained as well. I think it's a great place to live, and I do think there are problems, but I think that we can work our way through those.
Thank you. Candidate Suffredin.
Sure. So in our ward, and Candace, I'm sorry that you missed the meetings that we had on Envision, but we had early meetings, and one of the things that, in hindsight, I wish that I had raised was that the people who attended and participated in those meetings felt that the questions that were being asked were leading to an outcome, and as we've gotten farther down the road, that concern has ballooned in a way that leads to the element of mistrust related to Envision specifically, but our government generally. One of the biggest issues that faces our ward because of its geographic proximity to Skokie and Wilmette and other municipalities is that we're able to see where Evanston facilities and services fall short in a way that perhaps people who live in the center of Evanston and experience most of those things within Evanston don't see. If you go to a park in Skokie or Wilmette, you're likely to run into an Evanston family. If you go to the Skokie Library or the Wilmette Library, you're likely to run into an Evanston family. What we need to do, and acknowledging that the ward that I represent is in the northwest corner and things that are true up there aren't true throughout the rest of the city, is reinvest our time, energy, and priorities in making sure that Evanston services meet the standards of the communities that surround us, and not just the communities that are more wealthy and have simpler governments. But one of the most shocking things that I've experienced through my son's travel baseball is going to see how much better other communities' basic facilities are than ours.
Thank you. Well, it's time for the last question. And the last question will go first to Candidate Davis. What are the most important steps the council should take to advance the goals of the Climate Action and Resiliency Plan? Please be specific.
So one of the things that I've mentioned before, there's two things that I think are really important. The first is that if we care about the environment and we're actually going to say that we actually care about climate change, we have to put our money where our mouths are. And that means that we have to actually, allocate money, permanent money in the budget to these initiatives and to making sure that we're providing reasonable incentives to the things that will, quite frankly, cost money. It's not, if it was cheaper to be environmentally friendly, a lot of businesses or homes would already do those things. And so what that goes back to is the original problem, which is that we have to engage in long-term budgeting, match that to our goals, and then set actionable standards, which the CARP does a pretty good job at in making sure that we're actually trying to meet those goals and following up. I'll also say that one of the things that I'm actually not a fan of about CARP is that we're able to buy the energy credits and then count that towards our goals. It feels a little bit like a shortcut, and we have to do the meaningful work of actually cutting our emissions here in Evanston. The second thing that I'll say is that when it comes to in addition to making sure that we're focusing on our budget, we have to think about how we're social engineering. So if I were to give like a very tiny example, the composting program in Evanston is currently opt-in, and it should be opt-out. It should be something that we do as a default, and people have to make the effort to get out of if we want to encourage people to actually do sustainable practices. And we need to, in other ways, continuously try to social engineer so that people have to take action to not do the right thing.
Thank you. Candidate Mundy.
So I think our climate goals are an exact place where we need to look at the intention versus the reality. I think if I had to specify places where our plan needs to be adjusted, it would be in that we need to build in more cooperation and input from the property owners and property managers in town who have not only the vested interest, but will bear the burden of what the plan will do. I think our intention is a beautiful one, and I think that we can get there, but I would advocate for smaller steps. I think obviously starting with new development and holding them to the severe level of account would be a great place to start. I think that addressing other legacy buildings on a case-by-case basis would allow more community buy-in and allow input from those property managers. There are just realities that are difficult in taking a steam boiler building and converting it over to forced air, and where are those people going to live if it's a residential building and while it's under construction. We only have one planet, and it needs to be respected and protected, and I understand all of those things. I think that if I had to make a suggestion for our resiliency plan, it would be flexibility. I know that we have a day-specific and a goal-specific, but I think it's better to get somewhere than nowhere.
Thank you. Candidate Suffredin.
And a big piece of this may be answered Monday night or maybe pushed forward a little bit, but how we handle the Healthy Buildings Ordinance and what we do to acknowledge the reality that Mr. Mundy spoke about, which is that this will put a burden on building owners, and we can't be, it's not about building owners having this huge financial burden shifted to manufacturers, consultants, and all the people that are in charge of implementing the Healthy Buildings Ordinance. The reality is the money that the building owners have comes in smaller chunks from tenants, or in the case of condominiums, from owners. And this cost shift, if we don't get it right, will create a huge affordability crisis that could have been avoided with getting the rules right in the first place. I think the best way to have our CARP goals met, and I'm speaking specifically in the context of the Healthy Buildings Ordinance, is to make sure that we have rules that make sense and are easy, or easy is the wrong word, are followable and comply withable in a way that makes sense in light of our other goals. If we mess this up, we are creating a huge problem, not related to our CARP goals, but related to our affordability goals. And this goes back to one of the first questions, which is what should our biggest priority be? And it's putting this all together. So specifically getting the Healthy Buildings Ordinance right is the best way to get closer to achieving our CARP goals.
Thank you. And final answer, Candidate Chow.
I really believe we need to go back to the question around housing stock and affordability overall. I think that within the CARP plan, there are great goals. we should be focusing on what we can have control over. And if we're going to move forward with additional housing stock or re-envisioning the downtown, for instance, we should be focused on building performance standards for new construction as well as net zero requirements for new construction. And how can we make that possible as part of those developments and increased housing opportunities versus how do we retrofit the current buildings? I think I would say that's a later stage activity. I also think that, we do need to take a reverse approach, as kind of what Carrie had said, and really lead with the organizations that can make the most impact and have them buy into and set these standards. And then it's much more likely that all will follow in any introduction of new innovation, of new improvement, of something unknown. You have to have the larger organizations bought in and take the lead so that others can come along.
Very good. Thank you. Well, now we're ready for closing statements, and we will start with candidate Mundy.
My thanks to the League for hosting this. It was very well organized, and I appreciate your taking the time and spending the energy to do it. I'll close by saying our past need not be our future. What I represent is, my opponent will say that she'll fight for you. I won't fight for you. I'll get things done for you. If you look at my past, it's been a lifetime of service as a military officer, as a senior aide to a very senior senator in municipal government in the city of Chicago under Mayor Daley, and most recently in the city of Evanston on the Public Safety Civil Service Commission. My commission, since my joining, has put on board 48 police officers and 21 firefighter paramedics. If you'll remember, the city was in a crisis shortage of manpower for the police department. My message is one about working together and moving forward, not arguing about the past and not looking at where we have our differences. We are a community based on common values. I decided to raise my family here along with my wife because we wanted to be a part of a place that was welcoming and embracing of all perspectives. We are an interracial family, and I wanted my children to feel comfortable here and not feel other than. That's what Evanston is. I think that your choice in this race for the 7th Ward in particular has to do with what you want the next 4 years to look like. I am the future, and I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Candidate Selfridden.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I echo what Mr. Mundy said about thank you to the League for all the organization that this required and doing it and setting up everything and all the things that had to be done. We're very fortunate to have a very active League in Evanston, and I've seen the work that you all do as observers and putting together papers and everything, and really fantastic work. And so in the spirit of being a guest of yours, I will just say that I have been doing this job for 8 years. I've been doing this job with the utmost integrity. I have been someone who has put in a substantial amount of work when it comes to understanding what the issues are and asking questions that need to be asked. I ask questions that others don't ask because I pay attention to things that they don't pay attention to, whether that has to do with the stadium or our parks or the conditions of our staff. I am a person who asks questions, and the next 4 years are going to have critical decisions that need to be made. We cannot afford rookie mistakes. We cannot afford someone who does not ask questions to be in a position to make decisions that not only impact the next 4 years, but will impact the next 50 years of Evanston. Huge financial decisions, huge decisions about who we are, huge decisions about what Evanston will look like down the road and what it will look like tomorrow, literal day after today. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I hope that the voters of the 6th Ward will invite me to continue to do it for another 4. I will continue to fight for them. Sorry, Carrie.
Thank you. Candidate Chow.
Thank you. I think I would be remiss without saying today's International Women's Day. And I want to extend my appreciation to the League for the work they've been doing for over 100 years. I actually started my career as a leader for 2 different women's organizations in Washington, D.C. nationally. And I did that because I had experiences growing up where my mother had no voice in how she was being treated in her work and in her life. And I wanted others like her to have voice. And so that's really what brings me here today, is to give people a voice I work here. I have a business here. I also have had that business for 6 years, and that work is about helping other women advance in their careers when potentially they don't have voice. I've volunteered my time in many ways and many levels for the last 25 years, and I'm talking to residents, as I said, every day about their concerns and priorities. I have a strong track record of working together with people to get things done and things that will help all of us. That's why I have over 200 individuals who are supporting me on my supporter list and have been endorsed by various local Chicago leaders, Evanston leaders, not Chicago or Springfield, including Jay Lytle, who's our former mayor and 6th Ward alderman, Mark Tendam, who's our former 6th Ward alderman, Steve Haggerty, who's our former Evanston mayor, Dr. Paul Gorn, who's former District 65 superintendent, Jane Grover, who's former 7th Ward alderman, and several other current sitting members of council.
Thank you. And lastly, Candidate Davis.
Yeah, so I guess like my closing remarks, of course, is also to thank the league for putting this on. Enough has been said, or perhaps not enough, but either way. Generally speaking, I'm here for the people. I have a track history of organizing in Evanston, being involved, listening to residents, and collaborating. Through the work that I was doing when I was involved with the stadium, I reached out to so many different community organizations at Northwestern, in the city, and other wards. And I've put in the work of listening to people and making sure that we're bridging those gaps. In my individual capacity, people tell me all the time, you know, Periel, it's really impressive that you're doing this with young children, but I think it's important that we have those young voices and people representing the demographics that we say that we're worried or concerned about on city council. But on a similar note, you know, I run a nonprofit, and I have collaborated with multiple nonprofit organizations here in Evanston in the same capacity, and I believe that my experience in doing so gives me the ability to work collaboratively with the entire city, but also to bring perspective as to what is happening in other wards and how we can come to the table. I'll say finally, of course, you know, I am a software engineer, and I also am an attorney. And I think that that is a very unique background, and in itself, I can bring a lot to the table as it applies to policy, but also to making sure that we are taking a data-driven approach and that we are utilizing data and making sure that we're sticking to budgets in ways that others on city council may not have that particular experience. And I think the city would be much better for it.
Thank you. And thank you. That concludes the forum. Please give a round of applause to these hardworking candidates. I'm sure everyone here is going to vote, but your assignment is to make sure your friends and your family and your neighbors vote. And one way you can help them is to have them go to LWVE.org, the league website, and view the forum recordings, and they'll be up until Election Day. And remember, one vote can decide the election, and that one vote can be yours. Thank you.